creepypastas have a reputation that precedes them more than I think any other form of horror on the internet, and generally not in a good way. While things like the SCP Foundation generally are remembered fondly and still can be looked at through a guise of fear, with stories like SCP-1875 still getting a good scare out of me personally, creepypastas are not looked at with the same fear. While some of them definitely stand out for the high levels of quality, many of the popular ones were bottom of the barrel garbage that could only scare a 5-year-old, but that might just be my opinion. And while they have been having somewhat of a renaissance as of recently, with many YouTubers doing retrospectives on the old stories, it's mainly as a way of mocking the poorly written ones rather than looking at the game changers within the subgenre, which in all honesty, creepypastas had a ton of. I mean, truly just try and remember some of them. NES Godzilla, Funny Mouth, and Psychosis are just some of the ones that come to mind when I think of some of the best written ones. But when thinking about the old creepypastas that really changed the game of what a creepypasta could and couldn't do, the one that comes to mind first is the creepypasta following the evil killer bear in Caledon, Ontario, Canada. That of course being the infamous story 1999. And remember, if you haven't yet, like this video if you like it, and comment down below your thoughts on the video, and let's get on with the actual video. The story in 1999 follows a young man named Elliot as he reminisces on an old blog about a show he discovered on the public access channels in rural Ontario called Caledon Local 21. Which he discovered at the age of 5 years old while searching for something to watch in between the airtimes of Pokemon after his dad buys him a new TV so he can watch the news on the main television. The first episode that Elliot runs into is that of Mr. Bear's Cellar, a children's show where Mr. Bear, a guy in a bear mascot costume, gets a visitor into his cellar, which is always some sort of child. But with each episode, Mr. Bear gets more and more aggressive, doing things like chasing children while screaming obscenities at them after the child threatens to call the police. Then there's the other show that airs on the station, Soup and Spoon, involving a spoon chasing a can of soup, before cutting to a shot of the table with children all eating the soup with confused, frightening faces. This confuses our protagonist Elliot as he tries to figure out what's going on in his 5-year-old mind as each episode of Caledon Local 21 gets stranger and stranger, with Mr. Bear getting more and more unhinged as time goes along. Things finally reach their peak when in one of the episodes, Mr. Bear gives his address in order to meet all the kids that are watching the show nearby, with Elliot reaching out as he writes down and gets his father to take him to the Mr. Bear's cellar. However, upon arriving, they are greeted to police rummaging through the person's house who played Mr. Bear as they are searching for missing children that were from the surrounding area. This leads Elliot's father to take him back home as he doesn't want to be involved with the situation as he is told by the police officer what happened, but Elliot is still left in the dark of what's going on. And it wouldn't be till many years later where Elliot would be told the full extent of what happened in that small shack in Caledon, Ontario. When the curiosity got the better of him, Elliot begins to work with the Caledon Police Department as they try and figure out what truly happened and who Mr. Bear truly was, as he had not been captured yet for his awful, heinous crimes. This is where Elliot finds out the full extent of the crimes that the guy who played Mr. Bear had been doing. That of course being the ritualistic murder of all the children that had come to visit him in his cellar. This through fire in order to appease the devil in a small hole in his backyard. This twist is what really makes the story, as it shows just how heinous Mr. Bear truly was. He's not just a creepy man, but is in fact a satanic serial killer who wants to sacrifice every child he comes across in order to appease the devil himself. After finding this out and digging deeper into what could have happened, he goes to explore the property of Mr. Bear, where he finds the hole where the ritualistic murders had taken place. But this is where this situation gets even worse, as he starts to get mail from someone claiming to be Mr. Bear, as he claims that he will never stop, and explains how he was able to get the television slots in the first place, implying that he will never stop and will do it again and again until he gets what he wants from the devil himself. And this is where the story comes to an end, and now let's get on to my thoughts on the story as a whole. a very interesting relationship with this story, as this is one of the very first horror stories I'd heard while listening to creepypastas as a kid growing up. And I very distinctly remember this one lingering with me for quite a bit, but I didn't really understand just how creepy what Mr. Bear did was. As a kid, I was more scared by the murderous intentions of Mr. Bear, but didn't really grasp the fully horrifying way that Mr. Bear treats those children, with the letters in the story implying something much darker than just what we saw with the horrifying stuff in the hole. And as an adult, the story creeps me out much more with what we don't see and rather with what's implied, as the story shows under the surface that Mr. Bear was horrible all around, committing unspeakable atrocities to these children that the story can't even begin to describe. And that twist is still excellently done to this day, as before we know that something is definitely off, but we don't know the true extent to how bad things really are in Mr. Bear's cellar. But the reveal that he had been using the children in a ritualistic murder to appease the devil is something just so uniquely and creatively evil that it is without a doubt easy to see why this story was as influential as it was. But that's not to say the story itself is great all around. While the twist is definitely hard-hitting and by far the most terrifying part of the story, the rest of the story generally leaves a lot to be desired, especially with the story after the twist is revealed, as the first half is by far the stronger half of the story. I believe the story would have been much more frightening if it had just ended with the reveal of what was in the hole, as everything after that half of the story seems to drag on for much too long and doesn't reveal anything new except for the fact that he could still be out there doing it to this day. It's really a strong case of less is more, as the less we know about Mr. Bear, the creepier he is. But the first half of the story, up to the twist, is one of the most intriguing and creative creepypastas to this day, and really shows just why this story was influential as it was. And speaking of that influence, let's get into the stories that were influenced by this story. The influence that 1999 had on a bunch of creepypastas is legendary, as many stories wanted to be able to pull such a shocking twist, but none would reach the heights of 1999. One of the biggest that were influenced by the twist of 1999 is definitely Squidward's, with like many other stories that came afterwards trying to have a huge twist that involves the most shocking and gruesome subject matter, generally involving the deaths of children in horrible, insane ways. Every creepypasta after 1999 wanted to have some sort of shock value twist that really got people talking about the story in question. One of the ones I remember in particular being the story Where Bad Kids Go, about a horrifying PTSD that someone had seen in their childhood showing a locked door and children screaming from within. And later in their life, they go and find an abandoned film studio where they find the same door. Behind the door is a blood and excrement-filled room, with the only thing in there being a microphone hanging from the ceiling. This is just one of many creepypastas that were heavily influenced by 1999, as it seemed every single creepypasta at the time wanted to reach the level of success that it was able to achieve, for better or for worse. So in conclusion, do I think 1999 is a perfect creepypasta that shouldn't be criticized? No, it goes on for way too long in certain sections and doesn't really need anything past the first twist, as everything after that just comes across as filler. It's a prime example of less is more within horror, as while the twist is horrifying due to the unexplained nature behind the ritual, when the story tries to explain all that had been happening, it makes the story that much less scary. But you really cannot complain with the first half. The pacing in the first half is excellent, as it doesn't reveal too much, as it leaves Mr. Bear as a fairly ambiguous figure, with us only hearing his voice and never actually seeing his full appearance. We don't know much about him besides what he does to children and what he aired on television. That's it. Nothing more, and that's what makes Mr. Bear such a terrifying figure within the story and why the first half works so well. So to end this off, I think the story, being as influential as it is, actually makes sense, as the story is grounded with a creepy and intriguing villain and has one of the best twists of any creepypasta. And with all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and make sure if you enjoyed it to leave a like and a comment on your thoughts. And if you're not subscribed, I upload once a week, and I hope to see you all next week.